This day is celebrated at home and abroad, and it is actually a national holiday that gives people the opportunity to reflect on exactly what independence really means. So I'll first go with Ensa Toure, the history lecturer at the University of the Gambia, to really discuss what independence is respectfully supposed to mean in the Gambia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ibrahim. It is important today that we are celebrating and trying to reflect on actually the effort of a nation to actually mobilize or institute strategies that will actually end the colonial infiltration and hegemony, for that matter. I think we need a conceptual shift when it comes to the matters of independence. Conceptual shift in the sense that independence should not be actually be a narrative, a discourse, but it should be something that is interpreted and analyzed for us to understand. First of all, when we talk about independence, we are talking about not independence of an individual, we are talking about the independence of a nation. And when we talk about the independence of a nation, it constitutes the people or the communities living within a specific territory who were once dominated. And the question that we need to actually raise, why were they going for independence? What were they actually realizing that might have actually given them the motivation to jostle their hands for them to get their autonomy from the circle of control that had nothing to do with their current condition or previous condition for that matter. Gambian went to independence because maybe the European came and conquered them and ruled them. But in order for us to conceptualize effectively, we need to understand that within the global context, we understand that European infiltration in Africa started in the 15th century. And their initial contact with Africa was not actually centered on to control them politically or economically, but actually a contact for mutual interest where they could trade with Africa and actually establish exchange system, which we understood. But we understand that changes came as a result of the demand, especially when America was discovered, and America was also very, very strategic for European economic system. So manpower was actually required for production in order to ensure industrial continuity in Europe. So African manpower was actually demanded. But in order for us to go into, we need to go back. Was this in the latter part of the 19th century, or the latter part of the 20th century, or the middle of the 20th century, was it actually the beginning of African struggle for independence? There we need to go back in the pre-colonial Africa. We had to understand that Africa was in the middle of the two world system, the old world and that of the modern world system. The two spaces were used to actually facilitate. One that is through Sahara, which actually link us to the Middle East and the Arabs. The Atlantic zone that link us to European capitalist nations, co-nations, and in different time and space. So in the ancient time, when the Arabs were the core states, especially the Muslim, especially in the 7th century after the death of Prophet Muhammad, we understood that Arabs were moving. In order at that time, well before Europe emerged, in order for you to control and become what is called a core power in the world, you must be able to manipulate the conditions. You must have all the conditions with you, that is the sophistication. One, you have to have technological sophistication, military power and political condition and institutional sophistication. This was what actually forced these people. And in order for you to be well established to control the world system, one, you have to control the centers. So the Arab moved out well before Europe emerged. They controlled Baghdad intellectual center. They controlled Middle Eastern center, which was very, very strategic for India.
Trade, yeah.
At the same time, Egypt was controlled because Egypt, the River Nile was very, very strategic for them to control and then so production to supply. So Arabs became co-powers of the world. By extension, West Africa was very, very viable for gold.
Okay, this is in fact the point I want us to enumerate right now, because before even the contact with any other person or the outside world, Africa must have existed on its own definition. So let's look at how was Africa. Was it a village per
Africa
se?
was not a village, because you have to understand that civilization started in Africa. You have to understand even Adam, according to, was a black man. And we understand
Adam, you referring to the first prophet?
The progenitor of mankind was a black man. Sheikh Anta Job actually established that around the Great Lake River, and in the Holy Quran said that I created man in 6 days. I established my throne above the water. That corresponds to what Sheikh Anta Job was saying. So that means that life started in Africa around Great River, which we need to understand. So Africa was actually a center for human civilization. Africa was actually the creator of every human civilization. So therefore, the Arab attempt, because they believe that because of our color, because of our color and how they actually stereotype us, they believe that they could easily get into Africa, actually loot gold, go to the gold mine, loot and come, because we did not have a political and governance condition or state that will actually control or subject all this area into their control within the jurisdiction of Western Sudan. In their attempt to do that, aristocrats in Western Sudan, dominated by Sarahules and others, were able to actually unify and annex all other petty states and establish an empire across the Sahara Desert, and ensure that they generated policies and regulations that will ensure that no other nation could penetrate to loot. So therefore, gold nugget, which was more precious, which was a precious gold, was actually monopolized by the state, the dust, so that those who were coming outside will be subjected to regulations, and they will not be able to. They were not going to be able. They were not going to be able to get these things freely. So this was kind of an independent through a state establishment against the external forces, especially the Middle Eastern Arab. So they made several attempts to destroy the civilization and establishment to ensure that none of those kind of civilizations exist in the Black Africa. That's why in the 11th century, they had to create a kind of a terrorist movement in the name of Islam called Al-Murabitun. You understand me? They penetrated and destroyed Ghana in the 1076. Ghana, that marked the infiltration of Arabs, especially Arab Muslim, but they did not actually substitute a form of administrative structure that will actually substitute that to ensure that or to demonstrate that they were actually making an attempt to institute Islamic civilization. But it was an attempt to destroy, loot, and go and develop Muslim Spain.
Africa was really on its own. It existed, it has all the system before even contact with the European or even the Arab. This is an established history. Now, the question will be, especially to our history professor, excuse me for that, but history scholar, I mean, is what were Africa in terms of territorial integrity, in terms of defending what belongs to them? Because now, with the prestigious nature of the land, everyone from outside is interested in this continent. So one would have expected that, you know, the issue of colonialism wouldn't have not taken place in the first place.
Africa is the only continent that was, and that is still self-contained. That's why Africa could not adopt a form of approach of internal mobilization where they could actually generate arms to go out of this continent to invade others and bring whatever they did not have in their continent. Once a continent is self-contained, there was no need to move. So whatever was actually required for human existence or needed for human existence
was available.
Available and still available in Africa. So Africa had no other interest outside, maybe only to actually explore. So that's why Africa was independent. When it comes to political system, because after the downfall of Egypt, ancient Mali, ancient Ghana, and everywhere were actually established in an organized way with well-established political system. So Ghana Empire, when they actually realized an attempt by the Arabs to invade, to destroy or to loot, what they had to do, they had to annex. Not only that, even the military sophistication, they had to control Kanyaga under the Kante clan, Susu clan, Kante's area, in order for them to ensure that they built armory required for the territorial defense. And this was instituted for more than 200 to 300 years. Arabs could not penetrate. So this actually, we have to understand that part of Senegal was part of Ghana Empire. So the sophistication and the condition required for territorial defense was already instituted in Africa well before the Western European economic expansion.
Okay, before we move on to Sister Shines for her take on this, we want to look at what was Gambia then at that time. So this is, you're talking about Africa. So, and at this time, we think that everybody lived together. Would anything like Gambia exist at this time?
No, Gambia never existed as a jurisdiction, an independent jurisdiction, until in the 19th or in the 20th century, when we understood that the French and the British established their sphere. That was the time we could say that a specific jurisdiction that was identified within the global context called Gambia was actually established. Gambia was a kind of a geographical divide between the north and the southern Senegambia. It was part of the other political jurisdiction, part of Salom, which traversed down into Senegal. Part of Gambia was part of Cabo Empire. So therefore, and in the 19th century, Gambia was Fouta Jalon Imame, all the way from Guinea Conakry down to the Upper Gambian Valley up to Sankule Kunda. So there was no so that's why Gambia could be understood within the larger framework of Senegambia, because we were actually within the jurisdiction of Greater Senegambia. So Gambia never existed. So all these independent jurisdictions, especially you have the Kingdom of Salom, Kingdom of Nyomi, and others, and Cabo, they were all in the Gambia, and they were independent jurisdictions, and they had their well-established autonomous political system. So therefore, Gambia did not exist as a specific jurisdiction until when the sphere of influence, which dominated by the British.
Thank you very much for that insight. And at this point, Gambia is 56 years old and 15 minutes after independence, or following the collapse of British colonial rule in this West African part. Now we move to Sister Shines, who is joining me on the line. Welcome to the independence discourse. What do you make of the event?
Well, thank you so much, first of all, for inviting me to be part of this discussion today. It's indeed an honor and a privilege. So I want to say Abiyadi, Nangadef, Voltaire, Jambo. And yes, my name is Sister Shanice, and you know, I'm here in the Gambia at the moment, enjoying your beautiful country, the beautiful people, and absolutely, you know, delighted to be here to celebrate your 50th. I want to congratulate all of the Gambians who, you know, are going to be celebrating independence from now right throughout the day and beyond. And I know from my glance at just the segment of history around independence that became independent back on the 18th of February 1965, it was as a constitutional monarchy, which means that, you know, you were still part of the Commonwealth, and you still had Queen Elizabeth, that's the Queen of England, the second, who was the Queen of the Gambia. And you also at that time had the Governor General that was still responsible for the running of the country. And then I note that in April, on the 24th of April 1970, which I'm sure must be another day for celebration here in the Gambia took the next step towards total freedom and independence by becoming a republic. And, that was as a result of the referendum. And I say that to say this because, back then in the late 50s, early 60s, a number of African countries and Caribbean countries got their so-called independence. But, when we analyze and discuss independence now in terms of what it looks like it wasn't independence at all, because there's still a high level of dependency amongst African countries and Caribbean countries, on their former colonizers for everything. And we noticed as well that although we talk about independence, it appeared at that time that the former colonizers had left Africa and left the Caribbean. But, when we really analyze the extent to which African countries in the Caribbean are really independent, we realize that the colonizers never left at all, because they left behind their educational institutions, they left behind their law and legal institutions and frameworks, they left behind their political frameworks and institutions, they left behind their medical institutions, they kept control of the economies of their former colonies. And so, as a result, what we experience is what we're calling independence, but is not independence in its true meaning. But we certainly achieved a partial level of independence, which I think is worthy of celebrating, but I don't think we should, feel as though we've actually completed the journey. I feel that, we are enjoying the level of freedom and independence our ancestors, that our forefathers fought for us. And we still have a work to do to make sure that we continue with the struggle and we continue for the fight towards total independence. So I'm speaking on behalf of the diaspora.
Exactly.
The Africans
that is, in fact, the point, Sister
Africa.
because with the diaspora experience you have, and then realizing that even the struggle to liberate Africa from colonial rule was, in fact, very powerful in the diaspora. So one would want to ask, why wouldn't the diaspora ever forget to think of Africa?
Well, the diaspora, the Africans who found themselves outside of Africa as a result of the European slave trade, never ever forgot Africa. Those Africans fought for over 400 years, and we are continuing that fight. We experienced and we endured 400 terrible years on the plantation, but we never gave up longing for freedom. We never gave up the dream and the aspiration to return to Mama Africa. We fought on the plantations, we fought in the fields, we fought on the mountaintops, we fought in the hills and in the valleys, and we never gave up that dream and that vision for Africa and the knowledge that we were Africans. So despite the slave labor, despite the violence, the torture, the lynchings, despite the subjugation, the genocide, the rapes and the buggering, the castrations and everything else that we endured during our enslavement, we never gave up the fight for freedom. And, we have so many unsung heroes and sheroes. We know the names of many of our forefathers who were at the forefront of the struggle for freedom, who were at the forefront of the fight for our independence. And their names ought to be immortalized and remembered in the stories that we tell our children, in the schools. They need to be remembered in the stories that we tell our children in the colleges and the universities, so that their spirit for freedom lives on, you know, and so that we can continue the struggle towards independence throughout. And remember, the work that we do during this generation is not going to be for our enjoyment, it's going to be for the enjoyment of the next generation. Okay. We have to remember that the price that our forefathers paid for our independence was with their life and with the blood that was shed. And we should never snooze, we should never sleep, and we should never walk into slavery again, so that a future generation will have to go through what our forefathers went through in order to free ourselves as well. And I want to rise up as well, that small but powerful Caribbean island, Jamaica. The land of my parents. Okay. Why? Because they had a special place. You know, they deserve a special place in the history of the struggle for independence.
Okay, take us through that special place quickly, like Jamaica. Take us through quickly on what they contributed.
Yes, I mean, in terms of, you know, I want to just recognize the reggae artists and the works that they did to remind us that we are Africans, we are proud Africans. They were there through the music, helping the freedom fighters, you know, in the bush when they were fighting. I was told in some African countries that I went to by the veterans that it was the reggae music that helped to keep the fight and the struggle alive. And so, you know, we have been supporting the recent liberation that we have been
experiencing. I'll get back to you shortly, Sister Chinis, and then this will take me quickly. This will take me down to I'll get back to you shortly, and then answer. We've seen the story of struggle to liberate Africa is considered inspirational both at home and in the diaspora. So one would ask, why wouldn't the colonial ruler relax certain strict measures in their governance to make sure that Africa accepts the colonial situation forever?
And then they would never do that because you have to understand the context and the evolution of global system. Europe actually didn't just emerge out of vacuum. As I told you before, we need to look at the two space in terms of understanding the way we actually became linked with the global world. That is the two that we talk about, the Sahara, the Atlantic zone for that matter. Yes. When Atlantic zone was actually dominated by the Europeans, that was the time Europe dominated the world in terms of the quest for material in order to actually develop their countries. But what we need to understand, well before that, African nations, African states, and the kingdoms and empires were actually independent. And people were having capacity to actually dictate how the nation state. The kings and the monarchies were not in control of power. But power was regulated according to the response, according to the dictate of the people. You see, that was the independent. You understand what I mean here? But there was a shift, especially when European powers lost their control over American zone. Because why were they in America? When American zone was actually controlled, they needed manpower from Africa, leading to the Atlantic slave trade.
Support the evolution of slave trade. We want to explain this.
Yeah, because at that point in time, Europe created a condition in a way that where they actually had to arm the states through collaboration. So if one state is actually isolated, that state was going to be open to vulnerability by another state. So therefore, the involvement and participation was actually required for the state to survive. So it was a kind of, so the participation was actually involuntary.
So the evil reality of Samsung existed long time ago.
So once Americans attained their independence, and you understand that you have to look at the condition of America and geographic strategy. So where they could actually get the material to ensure continuity in terms of, so that was what constituted scramble for Africa in a new phase now that led to the abolition. Of slave trade, so-called legitimate trade was introduced. Why? Because if you had to introduce a system of production in Africa, you see that marked the beginning what economic domination. No, end of African economic independence, because now that they were actually exporting or importing peanut and other primary goods from America. America was closed for European control. Scramble for Africa emerged. Introduction of what? Introduction of legitimate trade. That products that were actually needed in European factories. For European factories to develop and to actually create market in Africa, they must actually stop manpower outflow from Africa, because if you actually deplete manpower, who were going to participate in the production of peanut and others? So therefore, whatever was required for European market and that of factories must be produced in Africa. Therefore, Africa must shift from the cereal-based economy to that of cash crop production centered on peanut. And you know that peanut was not required for their immediate. So you look at how independent begin to be exterminated. So that actually the end, or that marked the end of our economic independence, where they introduced peanut, forced our people to participate in that production. That was the period that marked our West African and our dependence on the capitalist market for the rice. So rice was introduced. We had to participate in the cash crop production. And if you know that you don't have cash at the end of the production or cultivation season, people had to move down to the central diction, where the Africans themselves were fighting against one another, Muslim and the Soninke. So when they understood that the violence was going to affect or was going to disrupt their economic interests, they had to intervene. After overthrow the Soninkes and that of the Muslim, and control. So listen, this also marked the beginning of our political independence, where Europe intervened to control the political system in order to avert any violence that might have threatened their economic interest in Africa.
Interesting, but you have to hold it down there, and then just to remind the viewers that this is the independent discourse, Gambia at 56, and then when you talk about Gambia, you mean Africa, how the continent gets its independence from Western, colonial rule, which is now being celebrated 50 years on. I will take a very short break and then continue with you in just a moment.
As the Gambia clocks 56 on 18th February 2021, your favorite Pan-African TV channel continues its dedication to bringing the greatest independence insights for you. Join us as we cover exclusively the historic events marking the end of Do not miss the full coverage, in-depth analysis, and reviews from 1965 to date, live on iAfrica TV. iAfrica TV, your Pan-African TV channel.
At this point in time, we now know that the struggle leading to the end of economic independence, political independence in this continent, thanks to my guest on this, and the contribution of the diaspora, both in anywhere in the world, to make sure that Africa becomes what it used to be and continue to struggle to be on its own. So I will just chip in, who is on the line, to really make into context what Esa said about the evolution of, how do we call it, the colonial invasion in the continent. However, let's also talk about what should be next in the continent now, Africa.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Well, very importantly, just want to raise one of our diasporans who was outstanding as well in never allowing us to forget that we are Africans and we need to return back to Africa, and that's the great Marcus Messiah Garvey. And what he said is that we as a people need to be more aware of our glorious past, so that we could be more inclined as a people to respect ourselves. Because if we were aware of our glorious past as a people, and we had a level of respect and pride for ourselves, then no other outside race could come in and divide us. Mm-hmm. They would not be able to divide and conquer us. And so his words, although spoken almost 100 years ago or so, are still as relevant today as it was back then. And what we were reminded of is that all of the world's history is African history. Yeah, the African history is the foundation of world history and the foundation of history itself. It was the golden ages of Africa that led to the glorious age of the Greeks. And it was the glorious age of the Greeks that led to the glorious age and the splendor of Rome. The first Europeans to be civilized by the Africans were the Greeks. And it was the Greeks who learnt at the feet of Africans, who then went back and took that education to the Roman, to other Europeans. And we must never forget either the splendid kingdoms, the palaces, the cities, the universities that we had here in Africa prior to the invasion of the Europeans. And we must never forget as well that we were the ones who invented education, street lighting. We had huge colossal monuments, the pyramids, the sphinxes, medicines. We invented mining and writing and arithmetic. And a lot of this knowledge is not even known to the vast majority of our people on the continent, because what we're studying is a Eurocentric education, and what we ought to be studying is an African-centered education, because although we have freed ourselves physically from the chains of our enslavement, what I mean is we're no longer wearing the chains around our ankles, around our hands, and around our necks, we are nevertheless still yet to free our minds and our soul. Yeah, so we recognize as the diaspora that there is still a work that needs to be done to free us mentally, that we are as a people still mentally enslaved, and this mental enslavement is being reinforced on a daily basis through the Eurocentric education, through the Eurocentric media, through the Eurocentric worldview of everything, because their Eurocentric worldview gives us an inferior perspective of ourselves as Africans, because the vast majority of our people have no idea of the greatness that we had risen to prior to the contact with the Europeans. And we elevate Europeans almost to a level of God, whereas, we are the ones who ought to be in that position, and we would know that if we knew our history. So we've liberated ourselves physically, we've yet to liberate our minds, we've yet to, really get to discover who we are and who we were as a people. And one of the things about living outside of Africa and in Europe, say, is that we have access to a huge amount of documentation, information, historical information, the music, and the richness of the resources and information that was stolen from out of Africa, that tells us who we are and what we had accomplished as a people. And there's a huge job of work to be done to share this knowledge, with our brothers and sisters on the continent. So it's like when we're coming back home,
are you also saying, Sister Sinesh, that the African universities need to open up for the knowledge that is African-centered and hopefully be so original than just copying from the West?
Sorry, yeah, I mean, once we understand who we are as a people, we will be in a position to have a free mind to begin to recreate the great golden ages of the past. But for as long as our mind is locked up, into the inferior view of who the Europeans have given us the image of who we are, we will never, ever really accomplish our greatness.
Okay, so Ensa, you can realize that, the same issue is in Africa and also in the diaspora. So I know a lot of followers who want to have their comments read out, but before we try anything on that, this is to remind the viewers that African independence means a lot, and then what more needs to be done. Already the effort made for the attainment of the physical independence, as Sister Sinesh put it, is being enormous. Now, mentally, the independence needs to happen, or does it happen already?
Anyway, what we need to understand, first of all, we need to question now in the 20th century, in 1965, when the actors stood up to jostle their hand for political and economic independence. You understand what I mean here? Yeah. What were they actually requesting from white man? What kind of independence? There must be a kind of a consciousness that must have actually motivated these people to jostle their hand for independence. What had been taken from us, that is the economy at that time and the political governance at that time. We need to question whether those who were going for independence, did they put into consideration that within the global system, their quest for independence would have actually raised the Gambia to get the economic and that of the political independence. First of all, elites actually stood up. You get me very well here. Yeah. First of all, what they had to do was to destroy the colonial governance monument. I get it very well. Building people, because if you don't build the capacity, as I told you in the Asante Empire, in the Kingdom of Combo, Fodesila attempted to actually relinquish Combo State to the British. When he got back to the people, they asked him, who gave you the authority in your attempt to relinquish this state to the white man, which means that people were in control of power. And the same thing should have been done in Africa, in the Gambia for that matter. That is to build capacity, because in the pre-colonial Africa, while we say it was an independent Africa, it was actually society or people-driven administration. But when those who went for independence, they adopted colonial institutional structure and trying to alienate people from the control of power. And in order to do that, there were preconditions. There should be preconditions. One, to build people capacity, to understand what constitutes a power relation. Because when the colonial system emerged, it was a decentralized political system where few minorities were able to actually institute a structure that actually hegemonized our people and make sure that our people were completely alienated from the power and the decision. Which means here we lost our political independence. Chiefs were appointed, which means chiefs didn't owe their mandate to the public. They owe their mandate to their employer, that is the governor. And when Gambia attained independence, was there any elements of altering these political structures? Chiefs were appointed, the governors were appointed. Okay. So which means that over the past 30 years, well before, all the appointments were coming from central government. Therefore, colonial system was decentralized with despotism. And our own independence constituted centralized system with another severe despotism against our people. So first of all, people's capacity need to be built to understand, and they will be able to control power and dictate it according to the demand, according to the need. So when we talk about independence now from 1965 to whatever, we need to question whether in the first place, do we have political independence?
In fact, this is the question, because now
we have
political independence is really
because
the case.
The colonial master was able to appoint 2 governors to control Gambia, to supervise the chief they appointed. Our people could not actually dictate the operation of the conduct of our chiefs. So it means that decisions were coming from the governor. You understand me? And in African system, it was bottom to top. When it comes to what? Approach, when it comes to governance. So that is why I said, when the first regime came to Gambia after the independence, they were appointing the chiefs, appointing the alcalis or whatever, appointing the governors for the people. So which means that the colonial institutional structures were actually maintained in order to ensure the minority elite domination over the Gambian people. So the system of independence, it was a de-racialized independence. This racialized independence in the context mean white man left as color, replaced by black colonialist.
Okay, this is my question to you now, 50 years on, that power is back to the African, and then what went wrong? Why wouldn't the system at this modify itself?
Those elites who emerged to just for independence were not conscious. Most of them didn't know anything about African history to understand which form of institution African adopted in order to establish states to ensure people control power. They did not understand. In the Asante Empire, if you coup d'etat or overthrew a king, even a child would question, why did you do that? Because these are the regulations in the society. These are the things that this person must have done that might have required him to be overthrown. But he did not do that. So which means everybody was conscious of what? Law. Laws of the state. But those who went for independence were trained by the white man. And they were very, very in a haste, and they were worried. They were in a haste to control power in order to adopt European system of hegemony. That was why Gambia at that time and the Gambian elites who took independence would not allow ordinarily the society or the community to dictate, or that was why they did not build the capacity of the people to be able to influence authority.
So things actually fell apart.
Because that we talk about the political independence. There was no political independence because the capacities were not built for people to be in control of the power as it was in the pre-colonial, some of the pre-colonial African society, especially in the government.
Okay. This is the real discourse, and then you're talking about Gambia's independence means African independence, and at this point in time, let me just bring in Sister Sinis here. If you know the continent is currently, every country tends to rely on the outside forces for support, even though Africa is supposedly independent. Still now rely heavily on the West for aids and grants. So when would this type of relationship develop to something that is more meaningful for the continent?
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think what we have achieved to date is partial independence. We still have a long way to go towards total independence. And the steps that we need to be taken towards our total independence would require us, as I said, first of all, to acquire knowledge of our history and who we were prior to colonization, our great kingdoms, our great empires. We need to have pride and confidence in our capabilities and abilities as a people. Because you see, once we made up in our mind, that we are a great people, then we will accomplish greatness. Now, Carter G. Woodson, one of our Diaspora Africans, he wrote a book called The Miseducation of the Negro, and he said, if you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. When you determine what a man shall think, you do not have to concern yourself about what he will do. If you make a man feel that he is inferior, you do not have to compel him to accept an inferior status, for he will seek it himself. And if you make a man think that he is just an outcast, you do not have to order him to the back door. He will go without being told. And if there is no back door, his very nature will demand one. He wrote that back in the 1930s, over 100 years ago, and it's almost the same until today. We are being miseducated into believing that we are less than, we are miseducated into believing that we are inferior, and as a result, we are acting like inferior, incapable individuals, when the reality is, if we knew who we were, we would realize that we are greater than, more than capable than, and we could be transforming Africa within one generation.
Okay, let me
what do we need to do now
to you
to
shortly,
move towards
Shanice.
that transformation?
You need to do rest. So if looking at the situation right now, what has been obtained, and now the continent is free and Africans are in charge. So days like today, which is the 56th independence anniversary of the Gambia, we know usually how it happens. The regular festivities will be going on. School children will be marching. The service will be marching. This is so really what is being celebrated in this perspective.
Who told you that we are free? You have to understand when the white man was leaving. The white man actually left an agency, and that agency was to take care of the interests of the European core nations in Africa, and these were the earliest educated elites. One, except people like Kwame Nkrumah, Sekou Touré and others, because they were very, very in touch with African values and culture and history, and that is why they were able to manipulate the condition to ensure that their nations actually was led to independent and total independent for that matter. And the condition of what it was created by Kwame Nkrumah, today it serves as catalyst for Ghana to be a model in Africa today. But what we need to understand here, independence is not about saluting to the flag. It's not about that, or hoisting a flag and saluting and just national anthem. Let me tell you one thing, we have all the ecological conditions for rice production, for us to be self-sufficient. But African leaders were depending on the World Bank. You understand what I mean? On the World Bank for support. And this actually constrained them. They could not create or generate any other thing on their own to be free. So what we need to understand, our independent celebration needs to be shifted. Not so from marching of the school children, it has to be brought to scholarly discourse like this. You understand what I mean? Where scholars and other people will come with papers for us to reflect whether actually what we are dancing for, whether it is attained or not. Because even today, we are depending on the capitalist market for what we need to eat our basic need. When we have the ground in Africa, structural adjustment you talk about, it was as a result of our dependence on the World Bank. So we need to strategize a lot. So there has to be a shift in terms of understanding of what independence means and the day means to all. It has to be a kind of a discourse. Families, towns, and whatever need to organize. So we need to shift from celebrating, dancing, or whatever. What are we dancing for? What are we dancing for?
For the
when you are actually your own survival, and you have all the conditions, ecological and natural conditions, for you to produce here. And that's why today we will depend on European medical health system, because the type of food that are gassed in Africa is causing a lot of ailments in Africa. Diabetics, high blood, or whatever. So our dependence is causing trouble for Africa.
Okay, let me quickly take you through some of the messages that are coming into this. So, well, you have a little appreciation, very enlightening indeed. Okay, thank you. You have LM Jula, who said, "Black man went to sleep and still sleeping. This is a wake-up calling to all African. Stand for your right." Yeah, someone say that is absolutely correct. So LM Jula said, any land that depends on give don't have independence. You have another interesting comment on the online platform by Aliu Jete, who said Africa needs to break away from the world market economy and restart our own. Why would you want to take part in a race that you always came last? So another comment, we are not free, we are still slaves. So these are emotional comments, but before I come to you, Ture, let's hear the reaction of Sister Chinis to these comments.
Yeah. I want to thank the listeners and the viewers for those comments. I understand the sentiments. I think, those who have commented realize that we're still on a journey and we still have a long way to go, and that it is premature for us to be celebrating and dancing as if we've achieved independence. If we do celebrate and dance, it should be in recognition that this is just a milestone, and there are many more milestones that we have yet to overcome. So, what we ought to be working towards doing right now is disbanding those colonial institutions, such systems and structures that were left in place after the former colonial masters actually left. So, for example, we need to be disbanding the political structures that we have and be putting in place an African-centered political structure that actually works for the people. We ought to be putting in place our own agriculture. We need to be independent agriculturally. We need to be independent industrially. We need to be independent educationally. We need to have our own independent technological systems. We shouldn't be relying on internet, for example, to be coming from Portugal or any other European country. We need to be technologically independent, medically independent, economically independent, as the text message sender said. Absolutely agree. And we need to put in place our own African-centered institutions. And it's not until we replace these former colonial structures and institutions with our own that we will become totally independent. The reason being is because, for example, within the former colonial economic system, the requirement is that we go to the World Bank for them to print the money, etc., etc. No, we need to take control of our own economy. Yeah, we need to take control, as was being said
very important point indeed. Africa needs to take control of its production and then really become independent fully. This takes me to Ray. And so, the situation is such that this is not supposedly a one-day work according to the prescriptions you give the needs to total independence. Who has a role, or apart from the university, or let's look at the educational institutions. What should they do to give a fast track total independence?
Independence normally is supposed to be in mind. The mind is very important. That is conscientization. If you don't conscientize the mind for it to be actually reflect on the realities of its control system, the mind will never, the person will never adopt any actions or mobilization to be able to extricate the person out of that control. So, and education is the only instrument for that conscientization. But what form of education? Which form of education? Because we are, is it education to be, educational system to be adopted, pattern on the European system, which is actually, we know that culturally we are different. So
an African system is applicable right now?
African system is applicable. But we understand that most of these people, that's why if you look at Kwame Nkrumah's initial attempt, one, build universities in Ghana to make sure that it is open free, it is open for every African who wants to go and read, so that we will be conscientized through education and within Africa for that matter. The second was Okosombo Dam, to generate, to create a foundation for African industrialization. If you look at his approach, but in the Gambia, where we didn't have, for over how many years, no education, and most of our elites were going out for their degrees, coming back. 4 years of what? Going back with new adaptation, perpetuating that in the minds of our people. Look at even, they could not even see the curriculum, where you can say that the black sheep of the family. Whenever you say the black sheep of the family, a child is aware of black sheep, which means somebody, which means a non-entity, something dark, something symbolically bad. So if you yourself, you are black as an African, that child will actually believe that conceptually, believe that anything that is black, including the black Africans, are completely bad. So it's going to be self-denial. Why can't we remove that from our curriculum? Black sheep of the family. The color is very important. You are black. We are black, and we are proud of our black because we know what we have in our body. So black sheep of the family proverb, not so. We still maintain that. And that color is actually affecting the minds of every children in this country. That's why wherever you see people will be bleaching, because we reject ourselves. And nobody, because in our education system, black man is rejected in the proverbs of white man. So when you say white sheep, is symbolically what? Glorious.
Okay, and Usman Damfa is following us. He said our people need to be sensitized about who we are. As people, we always have failed leadership that have no direction for oversight. I know the time remaining for this program is not much anymore. I will just go to Sister Sinis to throw a final word before we wrap up.
Yeah, just want to agree with Usman there and, reinforce what he was saying. Definitely, we need a new mindset. And a Eurocentric education is not going to give us the mindset that we need as Africans to do for self. A Eurocentric education is going to prepare us for jobs in Europe. And in order to prepare us for jobs in Europe, they have to prepare our minds to obey and to worship Europeans, to follow their instructions on what they say. What we need is an education that's going to prepare us to industrialize Africa, to do agriculture in Africa, to be to build the supermarkets in Africa. We need an African-centered education that's going to elevate our children to be proud of who they are as Africans.
Okay. Thank you, Sister Sinis. We have to leave it there because of time. Thank you very much. And then maybe what kind of message would you want to hear the president? Tomorrow there will be festivities and the president will have to send a message, and then in one word, which kind of message should the community hear?
The president should actually, the theme of his subject, we need to be conscious of new form of colonization within the context of a new global system. We have seen China coming on, India coming on, Europe is coming on. So there is a new form of attempt to recolonize Africa in a civilized way. Through what? Through bilateral diplomatic system.
Thank you very much, Ensa. We have no more time remaining. So it was my pleasure to have Ensa Toure, history lecturer at Gambia, University of the Gambia, and Sister Chinis, who is radio presenter, author, and film maker, to make this program a powerful one as Gambia clocks 56th. Later today, there'll be more festivities at the national level, international level. Africa will always be there to bring them live and recorded versions for you to continue following. Until then, thank you very much. I am Ibrahim Ba.
As the Gambia clocks 56 on 18th February 2021, your favorite Pan-African TV channel continues its dedication to bringing the greatest independence insights for you. Join us as we cover exclusively the historic events marking the end of colonial rule in Africa. Do not miss the full coverage, in-depth analysis, and reviews from 1965 to date, live on iAfrica TV. iAfrica TV, your Pan-African TV channel.
Did you know that agriculture is one of the most important sectors of the Gambian economy and one of the priority areas of development? Let us help you find opportunities in this diverse and vibrant sector. Agriculture provides employment and income for a majority of the Gambia's population, and education or specialized training institutes such as the Gambia College can help you pursue a career in the business. By completing your certified training, you have a better chance of securing employment or starting your own business in agriculture. The training does not just end with certification, you may also make use of career guidance opportunities, including job application and interview preparation. Are you one of those who believe that taking the back way is the only way to success? Head over to wakawell.info/Gambia to find out more about safe migration procedures and local opportunities for education, employment, and entrepreneurship in the Gambia.
The pride we take in our brand, the work we put into constantly change the landscape and elevate real estate in the Gambia, it's compared to none. From inception, our goal was to add value to the beautiful Gambian landscape. That's why we are proud innovators of community estates.